Gordon Miller is a 45-year industry veteran. He's not a hairdresser or salon owner, but primarily focuses time in the education and media side of the industry. He's currently the president and CEO of BeautyCast Network, which is connecting schools, students, and salons for jobs, as well as has his own company, Social Beauty Makers, which is media, newsletter, podcast where he does consulting and public speaking. Largely known for his leadership, AI, and giving context to the professional industry, today we're going to hear what he's seeing in the industry at large and what type of topics should we be talking about today. Welcome back to the Hairdresser Strong Show. My name is Robert Hughes, and I am your host. And today I'm with Gordon Miller. How are you doing today, Gordon?
I'm good, Robert. It's good to finally connect. We had that kind of chance meeting at Serious Business in New Orleans, and I've had to reschedule, I think, more than once with you. So I'm thrilled to finally be here. It's an honor.
Yeah, I'm excited too. And I'm actually kind of happy that it worked out this way because between serious business earlier in the year and now, I know like a lot of stuff has happened for us, and we were able to get through our annual conference, and I'm able to have like a clear head, and I'm kind of looking into the future a little bit more, and so I'm actually really excited that it all worked out this way. So thank you for your time.
Oh, thrilled to be here.
Okay, so we were talking a little bit before we got on about some really interesting topics, but before we jump into that, I'd like to just give any of the listeners or viewers who aren't familiar with you, if would you give us like a high level overview of your story into the industry and what you're doing now?
Sure. So 45 years. So we'll do we'll do each year, just the highlights of each year. No, like you said, excuse me, not a salon owner, not a hairdresser. I actually went to a four-year college, got a degree in investment finance and a minor in economics, and kind of graduated knowing I don't want to do these things. Like I don't know what I want to do, but I don't want to do these things. Moved back in with mom and dad. Long story. Nobody did that back then. It was the late '70s, and very quickly I was a closeted young gay kid moving back in with mom and dad for 4 years of college. I was like, I got to get out of the house. Opened up a newspaper. We used to do that. Looked for a job, and found an administrative type of job in a company that was located in a bank building. I thought my dad might think if I get a job in a bank building that I'm doing finance, and that might make him happy. So whatever this is, I'm going to go apply for it. Come to find out, chain of salons, chain of schools in Denver, Colorado, and I got the job, assuming I'd be there for a couple months and move on. And they really liked me, and I kind of really liked them. Again, the closeted gay kid, I was like, oh, they like gay people. And a lot of gay guys in the organization. I just, in 1978, you didn't see that. In 1978, it wasn't safe for a lot of us to be gay and to be open. And that's just the life we were living. So it was really kind of stunning to see there was an industry where perhaps my people were okay. And that led me to about 7 years working in beauty schools and salons in two different organizations. Loved it, learning it, got really excited about all the people who were in it. I was kind of the left brain guy in a very right brained industry. And so I felt very different, but I also felt I had something to offer. And I love the people, and I love every bit of it. Pivot Point found me, moved me to Chicago in 1986. I was with Pivot Point for 10 years. I left, I was VP. I then went on to be president of Milady Publishing. So that's the big textbook company, most students back then, had. So ran Milady for a bit. Then became executive director of National Cosmetology Association. So stepped in the association world. And then from there, Facebook began to happen. I got obsessed with social and digital media. That led to me leaving NCA and eventually becoming publisher of American Salon Magazine and .com, and then CEO and president of Hairbrain for 5 years. And then after I checked off everything on my to-do box, I was like, I'm just going to slow down and do some consulting, which led to a lot of fun, but kind of another little bit of a left turn into BeautyCast Network, which is all about young people, which I am having a blast with, but I continue to do my other stuff as well. So that's about as short as I can make it.
Nice. And so what about your passion project, Social Beauty Makers?
Yeah, and so Social Beauty Makers, again, came as I was thinking about wrapping up my time with Hairbrain. I had ownership in the company, planned to stay there until I retired. but I kind of did everything I wanted to do. And I really wanted to go back to brand consulting. I've done it in the past. I really wanted to consult specifically in the digital side of things. Social media had changed. I just was really frustrated by a lot of things happening. And so much that the big brands do with it impacts everybody. So I really wanted to get into that space, did that. I wanted to do more public speaking, did that. And then again, BeautyCast kind of happened at the same time. So Social Beauty Makers remains the place every day that I spend time just kind of pondering where the industry's headed, what it might mean for everybody, trying to grab onto as much information I can from as many people as I can in the industry, around the industry, and somehow try to kind of piece things together to paint the picture as to where we're all headed. And it's not an easy thing to do because there's not a lot of easily available data that you can hang your hat on. So it's a never ending process for me, but I've been more right than wrong, I think, over time. And so that's that part of my life. And sharing, I have a podcast, I have a newsletter. And so that's what that's all about.
Yeah, and everybody listening and watching Gordon's podcast and newsletter, you can find under Social Beauty Makers at socialbeautymakers.com. We'll leave the link
Thanks.
in description, so definitely go out, follow him, subscribe, and check him
Yep.
out.
It's all
Okay,
free.
and it's free. Awesome. All right, so something that you mentioned, is something that I think and talk about a lot, and is like, where are we going? You mentioned that, like, trying to give us context and help us like think about and understand where we're going. You also mentioned that there's very limited data available. I also have found that to be true, so I'm glad to know that it wasn't just me. Okay, so speaking of which, I was mentioning pre-recording, I just kind of wrapping up the news, and been a bunch of economic data came in with CPI, PPI, unemployment, and then the Fed minutes all happened, I think, all in 1 week. And so it paints a picture about what I'm seeing of, like, positive direction. We also have like things like an election and AI causing some uncertainty about how to paint the future. And what is something that you're most excited about, kind of looking forward for the industry specifically, and how it's going to affect the people in the industry?
I mean, AI is probably top of my list, and the reason being, if you step outside the industry and really put the time in to understand it, because it's really been popping for over a year now, and so I've lived in the weeds every day with it. I am fascinated. I do talk to big brands about it as well as everyday folks, and it has already taken hold. It's been with us for a long time. A lot of people don't understand that, but it's going to fundamentally change the world. I think all the smartest people in the world seem to agree on that point. And so, since there is that kind of universal agreement and a lot of proof points along the way that already impacted us, and with the big Apple announcements this week, I think it just even makes it more relevant to everybody, because when you really dig into the Apple announcements, it's all about the phone. I mean, it really is about putting AI squarely in the hands of everyone.
And
And
what was that announcement for anybody who didn't get that?
pardon me.
What announcement are you referring to, that people, in case anybody doesn't know what you're talking about?
Apple just did their global conference just last week. So if you just Google, actually, if you Google Apple Intelligence, because they have named AI that will be on the Apple platforms, not as just AI, but as AI that is meant as Apple Intelligence.
So good. Such a
So,
clever
so,
branding move.
so good, so good. But Google Apple Intelligence, maybe announcement, and you'll certainly find it. And so they have been very quiet about AI, really during this last year. And so the news is beginning to now kind of spill out as to what potentially is coming, and potentially to have well, it will have a big impact on every device that they have. I mean, they're scaling everything across all the devices, and really meant to be very voice enabled. I think the thing that fascinates me most about what we'll be able to do with our phones with the watch is pretty much, it's like, hey Uber, I want to run down to the XYZ restaurant tonight at 6 o'clock, and when you get a car here at 6:15, done. No reason to open the app. No reason, I'll get a notification when it's coming. It's a very simplistic example. But I think about our own industry, and it's like, hey, so and so app. My month end just came in. The financials are all there. They're next. They're in the Excel folder where you put them. Give me your high level take. How we doing? And that kind of potential feedback from an app with access to your data and a whole lot of best practices, again, could be game changing. Every salon owner who wants a coach could have a coach, but a coach that is driven completely by AI, at a level very different than where we sit today. So AI is definitely what excites me the most. I think we're a few years away from even beginning to understand where it might ultimately lead us. And so much is going to depend on the companies within the beauty industry investing money. So if AI again is going to be like electricity, electricity is a thing that can power things, but if someone doesn't lay all the wires down, then your town doesn't get electricity. And we need the wires laid down in the beauty industry, and that will depend on companies within the beauty industry to make the investments, to make the commitments, to to make their customers be comfortable with it. I mean, there's a lot, potentially that could happen, and time is going to tell. But it's exciting times.
So, just to throw you a little bit of a curveball, there's a lot of like there are creators who might be looking at this, watching and listening, and
Absolutely.
people outside of hairdressers who are, they're while they're creating content, they're primarily focused on driving customers into their chairs. But then there's also the creators that actually create the content, and that's their way. That's part of their business. And did you see the Adobe user agreement controversy?
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Do
absolutely.
you do you want to share with the listeners and viewers anything that you think what that is, and if you think that's important for us to know about?
Well, again, I think we're very early, so I don't get overly excited about anything. And I think you're referring to basically turning over the rights of everything that you create to Adobe, by using the platform. Those, by the way, you can turning over the content rights to Meta every time you put anything up. So if you think you own the content now, or you own it exclusively, then you're not understanding, really what's happening. So to me, it's an extension of what has been. And the real question becomes, well, what could go wrong? In other words, do we think Adobe is going to be taking your little TikTok video and trying to monetize it? And time will sort a lot of these things out. The New York Times is suing, the major platforms right now, over content, how it's being used, not necessarily the rights to it, but there's a lot of lawyers who are going to make a lot of money sorting out together what all this means and ultimately what we'll all have to deal with. But more than likely, we'll all end up with one of those 200-page contracts like we've all signed with Apple that none of us have read. Who knows what the fine print will be? I think most important, though, and there has been a lot of conversation with the creators. I've talked to a lot of them. And I said, creating content, and the evolution of technology and the creation of content, it kind of is interesting over the years, because I lived through the evolution and the beginning of Photoshop. I think the response of the industry to Photoshop was probably more negative than it is to AI, because again, Photoshop was using technology, and Naha had to eventually put rules in place, around it, and that was very late, So we lived through a different version of this, and we got through it successfully, and because we're not going to stop the world from changing, so we kind of have to figure out, well, then what's the best version of this for our industry, given what all of our needs are. To me, the power of AI potentially, is to transform the businesses and the careers of everyday professionals. If getting there means that there's other categories of the industry that might have larger challenges than perhaps the masses, then I would argue that, let's go for the greater good and sort out the rest of it. Now, having said that, we also hear that AI might destroy the world before we get there. So I don't want to be Pollyannish, but at the same time, I think we live in fascinating times and we're early. We're early. But
Yeah,
it's
for
moving
sure.
fast. It's moving fast.
It was Father's Day yesterday, and I have the luxury of having a father and a brother who's also a father, and I spent the day with him and went out took them out for lunch, and they love talking about this topic. They're both in IT, and
Mm.
they're both kind of like fringe little bit people. I hope my brother doesn't see this
Yeah,
because I
yeah,
don't know
yeah.
that he would think he's that, but a little bit. And so they do
Oh,
like to kind of everything kind of digresses to how machines or AI or something is going to be devastating to humans. But I tend to lean into the sci-fi future that it looks like, I don't know, like, are you into sci-fi films that since you're into technology?
probably not as hardcore as you, but
Okay.
if you're going where I would think you're going, like I would hope we go to the Star Trek version,
Well,
because
yeah. I mean, I think that's further in. I was thinking more like where there's just continued development. You see denser and denser cities. You see like corporations are like maybe a little invasive to in terms of commercials and ads and
yeah, yeah,
stuff, but nonetheless, like it's like kind of like metropolitan world, like think of Hong Kong on steroids.
yeah.
That's kind of the future that I imagine, especially when you have AI and advancements in technology. We can see some pretty cool stuff, but what do you,
Well,
are you
and those images have been planted in our heads for 30 years,
yeah.
so it's easy for us to go there. But the first one being Harrison Ford's Blade Runner, I mean,
Yeah.
Blade Runner, that was, future Tokyo. The whole world was like future Tokyo.
Right, right.
Cool, but creepy.
Creepy. Yeah.
We're not sure if we're going towards cool and creepy or cool and maybe somewhere in the middle or maybe cool and happy or maybe who knows. But again, so much to consider. And what is most important is not necessarily what the AI is going to do with us, but what we do with it and to one another. I mean, because that really speaks to what you're talking about. It's like, who's going to regulate it? How's it going to be regulated? Another version of all of this is kind of metaphorically is nuclear power, has transformed the world in so many good ways, and yet is the most horrific weapon that's ever been dreamed of and used, right? And certainly in wrong hands, even the power plants are problematic for the environment. So, but again, the good and the bad of something.
Yeah.
And are we going to be responsible, as humanity? If you watch the sci-fi movies, probably not. So,
Well, okay, so that we've addressed like existentialism,
yeah.
and existential crisis or whatever concerns. Let's talk about the important thing is like how can we how when we're thinking about AI and other advancements in technology, you had also I'd like to tie this in to businesses and businesses at various levels and types, but specifically in our industry, you were talking a little bit about breaking the rules a little bit, and by the time this podcast comes out, I guess yours will have been out
Yeah, yeah,
by
yeah.
now. And would you like to touch on that?
So the episode is called "Learn the Rules Before You Break Them: the Business Edition." And with all the coaching conversations that are happening in the industry, many of which I find problematic. There's like everything. Great haircutters, educators. In the middle somewhere, and not so good. And the same is true of coaches. And because we're in this social world these days, sometimes big ideas that may or may not have legs under them are just traveling, just so fast. We years ago kind of, I think, as an industry agreed that the best way to be a great hairdresser was to learn the rules. And then as you got better, that you had the ability to quote unquote break them, bend them, do whatever. And it's acceptable. I'm finding in this moment of hearing a lot of bad business advice floating around the industry, I just had this moment where I was like, the best advice I would have to anybody who wants to be self-employed or to own a salon would be to first learn the rules. Go someplace where you can learn everything and anything you need to know about the business of beauty at the level you want to be in it, before you decide to break the rules. Because there's a lot of rule breaking going on with coaches right now. So I just think it's great advice. We've taken it for years on the technical side. And so I think it's time to be talking about it, on the business and career development side of things. And so it's not to say don't break the rules or the rules can't be broken or bent, but again, start with a foundation of kind of proven truths and understanding, and then see how they fit into your life. Because we're definitely in uncharted territories, I think, as far as just how the industry is evolving at the moment. We've never had the level of independence we've had. We've never seen in the last 30 years. I would say we're seeing brands kind of move away from education in terms of the massive education they put out. They're not moving away from education per se. They just don't have as many resources put towards it, in part because the demand's not there. So it's so when you have so many people statistically moving from being parts of teams to being solely dependent upon themselves, um, then I think the question of how do you grow yourself when education is beginning to shrink, or when mentorship is not easily available to you, or role models are not easily available to you. I mean, these are things that are happening, I think, in the independent space, which has exploded, and the jury's out on how the independent space will evolve in the coming years. It's going to be fascinating to watch. And again, I'm not anti or pro. I'm just like I'm fascinated with what's happening.
So there's a few things that kind of came to mind. One thing you were talking about, we were just talking about AI, and then now when we transition to the business, and you brought up a few things in the world of business, and I just want to kind of connect what we were talking about to this in a question. What do you think about you touched on uh, well, I don't know if you touched on it. I'm going to tell you something. You tell me if this is something that you were touching on. There's been growing concern or conversation, both off screen and on screen. So you're seeing it in social media more. It's not large, and I think that's another topic of conversation. Why it's not bigger than this, but people are starting to call into question the value of influencers who monetize their following through selling education, coaching, and consulting. So we've had an explosion of coaches, an explosion of consultants, we've had an explosion of educators, and now people are starting to finally start to say, oh, wait a minute, I don't know if I got the value, or I don't know if I got good advice. I'm having some coaches I interviewed telling me that they have people coming to them saying, I paid so and so all this money and I feel like I didn't learn anything, or I paid this so and
Right.
so to teach me a cutting class, and all I did was, I spent $250 watching them cut hair, and I just learned a new trick with the flat iron,
Right.
so however, now that said, I don't know, one is that, were you touching on that, or did I just bring up a new topic?
Well, no, I touched on the explosion of coaches specifically. So
Okay.
one of all those categories. But let me say in just reaction really quick, and you may have someplace else to take us. There's little new about this conversation except the categories. So again, I've been at this for decades. I heard early in my career from hairdressers in the old days, like pre-internet or like the beginning of the internet, that yeah, I went to see so and so and I paid a lot of money for the class, and all I got was how to do a single curl on a curl. Same thing, different era, and then so we saw education really explode in the 90s. And so kind of a new thing. It was almost like early influencers. Again, it wasn't around technology, but it was this, and it had to do with the brands coming in, all that was connected to it, the recognition, the realization that you could get education in, in in new ways because the brands were putting so much behind it. So we've just had these eras, and what's true today in terms of concern of many has been true in every one of those eras. It's just because of social media, the conversations about the class don't think I got value from are just much bigger because they're happening out in the open. But as an observer, I don't see it really being any different. And when influencers first happened, which is like 10 years ago now, so it's been a bit, there was a huge explosion of that moment. And that moment was like a battle between the pre-influencer artistic crowd in the industry, the platform artists, the big room educators, the collection creators, and this new group of people coming in. They kind of all settled down. The brands got the creators or the new creators and the old creators together. They started training influencers and old school educators together. And things kind of settled for a bit. And then coming out of COVID, it's kind of when the word creator kind of happened, which was just a label. People were already doing content before that. It feels like it's come back again, like the same, another wave of the same concerns. Like, who are these people? They're not good at this, that, and the other. And I would say that's true. Absolutely. There are people in the influencer brand ambassador category who aren't good at certain things. And let's just say it's the classroom, for as an example. Um, there are many, 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 many more educators in the industry than there are content creators. They work for brands in the thousands upon thousands. In that group of people, there are many, many, many who aren't that good at many things. So,
I see what you're saying. So like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, makes sense. So, while this may seem like a new conversation or a new thing, this is it's there's always been the case where we haven't really had a lot of accountability in that space. That's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing because if there was accountability and there was like some sort of space set up for a feedback loop, then perhaps that we could elevate all of it together in the industry. But also at the same time, it's so big that it's going to be hard to have like quality control across the whole board.
which has always been the case, and I
Yeah.
think one of the problems today that makes it a little bit, more dicey perhaps, is that most of the people that are being talked about in these conversations, for good or for bad, they're on contracts with brands. So and again, old school, it was very similar, but you didn't have the megaphone of social media. So a person who signs a significant contract with a big brand today can go from being known to being like uber known, just because of the megaphone of social. And then that automatically kind of puts their stamp of approval on that person, whether the brand intended that or not, as it relates to being a good classroom educator. So things moving faster, moving bigger, different versions of an old problem.
Okay. All right. So, moving into the next thing I was going to say was that if say I'm a coach or a consultant or whatever, and
They're
I'm
different,
like,
but
uh,
yes.
huh?
They're different, but yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just say that I'm trying to monetize my social media following by selling some sort of advice or education.
Mhm.
And I don't really have any history in that. And so I create my own concept and my own ideas. And then I go to AI and I ask it to create a curriculum for
Mhm.
me.
Yeah.
Do you think that I'm better equipped than maybe the person who doesn't have AI to help create the curriculum, or do you think that that creates a false sense of ability, know-how, and maybe even confidence?
No, I mean, it's again, I would. Oh, I just touched the wire. No, there. Okay. Um, Again, everything is kind of a different version of what has been for a long time. So before people, because I come from publishing, right? So there are hairdresser books in the industry that have the hairdresser's name on it, have the hairdresser's story in it, but the hairdresser didn't write it. But it says by hairdresser XYZ. So you had ghostwriters, you had editors, you had all kinds of process. And growing up on the educational side of the publishing industry from way back when, anybody who had the money to hire a good editor can, just like you say to AI, can you give me an outline for a curriculum that does the following things and blah, blah, blah. You get a better editor than somebody else, your outline at old school would be better than somebody else's. And you may be the person with the least talent, the person least capable of teaching the topic, but you spent the money for a good editor who made you look good before you step into the classroom. AI is a different version of that. Yes, it will be easier probably for someone to fake their way into it. And so again, hard to know where this is all going to take us, but going to Barnes and Noble, which I still love to do. We just had a new Barnes and Noble open up the street from me. I'm very excited. but all those thousands upon thousands of books. And if you're a person who enjoys the bookstore and just go stand in front of the business section and start opening books, you'll quickly realize that there's a lot of books that suck on that bookshelf for all kinds of reasons. The way they're laid out, the way they're written, the quality of whatever. And before you even start to dig into the quality of the material. And I think you'll find, a variance there, just like when you're in the grocery store. There's really great food that's good for you. Let's base it on health in this example. There's stuff in the middle, and there's just stuff that's just horrible for you. But it's all in the grocery store. And we got to figure it out.
I mean, yeah. So I feel like this is pretty funny because we've been talking about a number of topics that seem to be new, and they're just not. So
Well,
that
they're tools to use around all the things you're bringing up, like, writing a curriculum. Like we've been writing curriculums for 100 years, but the tools to do it have changed. Again, because I'm older, I remember when Word happened. Like, can you imagine if there was no such thing as Word? Like, I
no.
mean, well, there was a time when there wasn't Word, and we used typewriters, and we had the little paint things where we would paint over our mistakes and type it again. So, technology has allowed us to do things, mostly the same things we were doing 100 years ago. Because our industry, Sam Mercado said to me a long time ago, he's like, Gordon, this is not a complicated industry. He said, it's just not. He said, it's not easy. It's hard, but it's not complicated in terms of understanding the drivers. And again, when I look at the history of the industry, to me, what's always changing is not the people, is not necessarily the clients. We change, but we kind of slowly change as humans. And much of how we are as humans comes from our caveman days, the way we react to things, the way that, our whole, survival instincts, that all comes from a certain place. But really, almost all change that's impacted the industry in profound ways has been technological in nature. The development of hair color, the development of perms. That's technology made that happen, because that technology was often used in other industries too. Just the fact that a factory could make the fill bottles. I mean, there's all kinds of things. So again, I think you can just kind of look through eras and really start to try to figure out, well, how come it changed then? And again, I think you will most often come back to some sort of larger shift in technology in the world that rippled over to us. And so hopefully it keeps rippling.
So what going back to something you said earlier, what you're talking about breaking the rules, and so what things do you see happening in terms of businesses? Like the whole concept of learn the rules and then break them. What are you seeing specifically? Give us some
Well, the most
examples.
worrisome thing that I've always seen, but I've never seen it at the level that we see it today, because this has been with us for as long as I've been around, and it's been pretty much agreed upon by a lot of folks across the industry. And that is the desire to be my own boss, the desire to own my own business. And so independence for many years, it wasn't even an option. But still, everybody kind of wanted to own their own business someday. And when you look at the history of the industry and ownership, it's not that different than the small business story of America, which is that most fail. But with us, because we have this independent model, which is somewhat unique to our industry, there's others kind of that have it, but not quite the same as what we have. The barriers to entry to ownership have come down dramatically. And that really is because of technology again, by the way. I mean, you look at why did independence explode? What happened pre-pandemic, and it happened because of apps. Apps is what set certain hairdressers free, to be able, and especially those who are business minded, who said, I always wanted to go in business, but I didn't have time to manage my book. I didn't have time to manage my accounting. I didn't have time to, they recognized it. They understood it. It held them back. It's like, darn, I want to do it so bad. Then all of a sudden we have apps. Not only apps to help me book, but apps to help me do my accounting, apps to market, on and on and on. So the barriers to entry go down. The word of the experience of those going into independence starts to spread on social media. Look at what I've done. I've opened my suite. I'm so excited. Look at me. And really importantly around that conversation, and this all connects to my bigger concern, is that most of those who have the biggest influence in our industry today relative to hairdressers, going back to influencers and brand ambassadors, most of them are independent. And nobody was thinking about it, but you go back 10 years ago, the early big names were mostly independent. So they become heroes, right? It's like, this person is doing this and it's really cool and they've got their own space. And that seems like I could do that perhaps. I'm not looking to be an influencer, but I want my own space. So there's just been this, because of technology, there's been perceptions that have been created that I think too often are misunderstood that lead people to even be more motivated to do what most want to do, which is open their own business. And what I see and hear coming out of the suites, is dramatic and to me quite negative. I see a lot of careers, kind of coming to an end, or people going to work at home, or just kind of moving downstream. There's little to no data on any of this. Again, it's a problem, but it kind of makes sense because if you look at the data for small businesses, most over the course of 3 to 5 years fail. And now you have an explosion of independence. Well, those are small business people. So, I mean, the logic says that most of them probably will fail. And it just is what it is. But to me, any failure in the beauty industry makes me sad because I love the industry. It's been that good to me. And I don't think anybody comes here to fail. But what I do find is that today, because of the way information is flowing, that it's too easy to just want to grab the gold ring now. And that's going back to the know the rules before you break them. I'd say to anybody who wants to be in business, go figure out, what it takes to be a successful business person in the beauty industry. Go find a role model, go find a mentor. Ideally, go to work for somebody where you can learn, about the business and focus on it. If you want to do it quietly because it's a secret dream in the back of your head, you're not even sure you're going to go down that route. We'll make a point of paying attention, right? Make a point of starting to read business publications, outside of beauty. Just get a sense of what it really takes and decide whether you're going to get joy from it because you have to. I mean, I live on the business side of beauty and I get great joy from it or I wouldn't still be here after 40 years. I really love what I do. And like most good careers, it's been many things, and I think that's important for anybody who wants to go into business for themselves to also understand that having one of the challenges in being self-employed is it's a big commitment. It's not easy to take some of those other career directions. I know a lot of people who've gone into independence and then want to go into education and are now dividing their efforts into two career paths. And one of them or both of them typically suffer. And I've just watched that too often over time too. Life is complicated. Careers are complicated.
So, yeah, I mean, from everything that you're saying, I totally have seen what you're talking about. I would love it if we could get access to the churn data of Sola Suites and all these Phoenix and all these big names. That would be incredible if they posted that data.
Yeah,
Um,
not happening anytime soon. It's
so
under lock and key. But interestingly, I try any chance I get to go into those buildings. Get tours. My partner's a hairdresser, so it makes it a little easier to just go check things out. And I really pay attention to the level of vacancies in the buildings. I live in Chicago. We have a lot of sweet organizations here. All the big ones are here. I was in 2 weekends ago. I was in one. It might be one of the biggest ones in the city. I didn't even realize how big it was until I was standing in front of the manager of the location, and it's one of the big national chains. And I said, "How many units are there?" And he said, "53." And I
wow.
was like, "In one building, a lot of units." Really, really fascinating. But yet, nobody's talking churn. But the churn is real, and I get most of my feedback about churn from people who work in buildings and have been working in them for a long time. I'm doing really well. My neighbor's doing really well, and 5 other neighbors just keep churning through this place. So
This conversation I think is really interesting because if suites aren't doing if going independent is it has a low has a as low a success rate as say all small businesses across America, then that would mean that there's a lot of individuals that are suffering the pain of losing their business,
Right.
when typically a business has employees. So, like, yes, while the employees have to go and look for a new job, it's nothing. You don't have the same investments. You don't have the same like emotional attachment. So that's like a hard hardship for the industry that I also am wondering, with the advancements in technology, do you think that places like the Solas and the Phoenix and the what, there's the one I can't missing,
There's
but
Salon Loft from Ohio. There's My
Swan
Salon
Lofts, yeah, that's
Suites.
the other
There's
one.
Salon Republic. So
Yeah, so I wonder, from a person from your perspective and thumb on the pulse with like technology, do you think that they will be adopting more and more tools to ensure the success of their tenants? Because just because it's good for business, I mean, eventually the if it is a low, if it is a high churn, that reality will become public, and it'll become less desirable to go into salon. I mean, I would assume that the market would play out. So it's in their, I would assume that it would be in their best interest to improve or decrease that churn rate by helping them, give them more resources. What are your thoughts on that?
again, a long-standing problem that's been across the entire industry forever. Meaning that even in traditional salons, retention of staff was number one problem. Yeah, everybody needs more help. Small businesses needing more help, and potentially going out of business faster than they should. Suites, if you think of the suite, the building owner, like as a salon owner in a sense, yeah, metaphorically, yeah, like a smart salon, and we have plenty of smart salons in America who focus on this all the time, who develop great programs, who hold on to staff, and know many of them. The suites are doing a lot of that already. They will continue to, absolutely, I have no doubt about that. The real question is, again, are the people who are in their buildings, do they have the maturity as professional people to understand, to avail themselves to all the things that they need to be successful? And that, again, I think is such an important part of going to work in a good, hopefully a great salon at the earliest stages of your career, so you can kind of get those role models and see how it's done. You know, it's hard to go to school, I think, and then want to educate yourself every day when you just finish education. And a lot of people told you kind of know everything you're supposed to know, and you just haven't been around people who kind of led you down the proper path of, yeah, but you got to keep learning. And we all hear it, and hearing is one thing, doing it's another. And I think suite owners, the building owners, have a more challenging audience even than a traditional salon in some ways, because they don't necessarily see themselves there to be mentored. They see themselves there to be business owners. And for a lot of folks in our industry, that just means I get to make more money, which is a fallacy, by the way.
Yeah, and I also I have some anecdotal data that um, there is a high interest in continuing education from suite renters. However, it does seem that most of that education is technical. That's just my own anecdote. I don't have
That's
like
the whole
macro
industry.
data.
Yeah, that's the whole industry. Yeah.
Yeah, so that kind of plays into supporting what you're saying.
Well, and the
Uh,
other thing that we don't know, and we don't, but what little bit we know, I don't think is very encouraging, is that because we don't have data, yes, there is interest in all kinds of education always, but we don't know the percentage of it, of the whole, number one. Because we hear the loud people, all of us, right? And with social media, it's easy to misunderstand what it really means. But then the other thing we don't know is the price sensitivity of the student, learner, professional, for whatever the education is. And because a lot of people, where do you get your education? Oh, I go to a big beauty show every year, and I take a couple classes. And I'm like, okay, good for you, but that's not a good plan for your education for the year if you really want to maintain a career. So it's complicated. Back to that.
so this conversation is kind of going in a direction of a topic more and more that I is really big to me, and it makes sense that it would be big to you because of BeautyCast Network and your involvement with the schools and the students. I'm going to lay out a scenario, and I want you to tell me what your thoughts on it are. Um, One of the big challenges that I've discovered between salon owners and rising stylists is that other than the reality that the older generation does have to and entrepreneurs in general have to continue to adopt to new trends in the market, which might mean adjusting their business practices and their in onboarding and their communication styles and upgrading their culture and all that stuff. Now I like, we definitely think that salon owners have a part to play in improving that friction that I've discovered that it seems like so many people are aware of, between expectations of salon owners and then expectations of students for of their salon owners. Um, it seems that on the student's end, a lot of focus goes into like the schools or the curriculum or whatever. But what I've found is those things are relatively immovable, except for over long periods of time. So, like, kind of trying to go after the schools and how they're going to teach is more of a long term strategy. It seems like less of a short term. And in the short term, if the only solution that I've been able to find is that the young students, not the ones that are going for their second career, but they haven't had any real exposure to working. Definitely not working in a salon. They can't afford to work in a salon because prices have gotten so high, and they can get like a higher paying job doing like tele something remote, or so many of them make more money than they would assisting or apprenticing, and then their hours. If you want to go talk about what the schools could do differently, they could have more flexible hours so that people can actually work in a salon while they're in school. Because what most of the people, at least in the DMV area, they cannot work because of their hours. So then they end up working different hours. So basically, my point is, this concept, this best practice of getting your foot in the door, seems to be completely lost on this younger group. And so, like, how? So, like, what reality do they actually have to create their career plan for them while they're in school? Because what I'm seeing is they're not. I mean, they're only taking with a grain of salt what their teachers are saying. They're looking more to influencers, and those influencers help them create an echo chamber. The algorithm creates an echo chamber, tells them exactly what they want to hear, and they create this whole career based on a vacuum, essentially. And then they get into the real world, and then I'm getting phone calls of where they're upset because things aren't going the way they planned on it, and but they don't take the advice to like get out and like get some real world exposure. What are your thoughts about that?
I was getting those phone calls 25, 30 years ago. You weren't here yet. But so again, very little has changed. Very little has changed. And I'm just being honest. Um, a very small percentage of young people, and I spent 22 years in the school side of the industry. Pivot Point, Milady, been in hundreds upon hundreds of schools in every state in America except for Alaska and Hawaii. And so just lived in that world. And again, in my view, not a whole lot has changed. A small percentage of students were the ones who were motivated to go find a job in a salon because they were that motivated, right? And the advice was the same back then. This is the best thing you can do. Go get a job. Uh, the hours of schools is a little tricky. I mean, every state's different, but there are controls on all that stuff as far as when schools are open and how students are able to flow things through programs and classroom time. It gets complicated, so I'm not sure how easy some of that is in terms of solving problems. But I think that it starts with, well, how many of them want those jobs and how many of those jobs exist? You look at the coaching space, and they're saying, get rid of all your support staff, you know, get rid of your receptionists. You don't need those things. Don't be an assistant. So, you kind of got some tension, there around some of this. So again, it just feels like different versions of the same problem. The generations have always been challenged. We're having a much louder conversation because this last big shift in the birth of this new generation into adulthood happened during pandemic. And
Right.
so I think everything got magnified.
Yeah.
Trust me, the generation before me thought we were crazy. My generation, just flat out crazy. Now, I was talking to Michael Cole about this, and I said, Michael, the whole generational conversation, I said, I don't want to be a couple of old guys, saying we're confused, but what's your take, on the new generation? And he said, he said, the only thing I can say, he said, our generation, he says, we were all about, peace, love, and happiness. He says, until we discovered money. He said that was at about age 30 for most of us. And he said, and every generation that followed, was at a certain age, had high aspirations and saw, a more utopian version of the world based on whatever they had been going through and coming out of. And he said, so it doesn't feel that different. He says, it's just a question of when this generation, will change. I got a fascinating report related to this on Friday about Gen Z and the topic of sustainability. And McKinsey, they're a big, cruncher of numbers globally across almost every sector of the economy you could imagine. And they did a really deep study on it, and they said that when it comes to price sensitivity around products and sustainability, there basically is little, meaning that if you have to pay more money to get the sustainable product and you're Gen Z, their report showed you were less likely to pay for the product. You wouldn't buy it. So if it was priced the same, sustainability was a value. If you had to pay more money for your sustainability, not so important. So that's an interesting insight into the bigger conversation about a generation and what it cares about. And I'm not saying they don't care about sustainability. I think more than any other generation, I would assume, and I believe that they do. But then what?
Right. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk on all these different topics. There's a lot of like little pockets of the industry that I feel like don't really get talked about enough, and there's a lot of like narratives running around that people really lean into and buy into, and I think definitely we may have given some context to dispel some of these narratives, like especially the parts where you're saying that these are not new conversations, they're just louder. Perhaps maybe with technology there are some tools to help these conversations come to solutions so that these conversations don't continue to happen. Hopefully in 10 or 20 years from now this conversation isn't happening again with the same problems.
And let me add there, I think that you use the word context. I think it's so important. And I think, context helps create expectations. And I think one of the bigger problems that we've always had as an industry is not everybody has their expectations set appropriately for what's ahead. And they're all going to be different, depending on who we are and what resources we have or don't have, or where we went to school or didn't go to school, but I do believe that our biggest challenge is lack of perhaps the right expectations. And we live in a time where we want everything, all of us want everything, regardless of our age, to happen faster than it's going to. And I think that if we could just get the expectations set, then whatever technologies will come, they'll all be helpful. But if our expectations are wrong, if we're hell bent on being successful by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, then regardless of the technologies, more people will be challenged than not. And that's a problem all by itself.
That's good. That's good. Well, as we just to sign off, is there? I'm curious to know if you want to sign off with anything kind of looking forward. With your vantage point and your experience, I'd be curious if you want to leave us with some perspective, maybe some prediction, or maybe some anything that you're looking into the future at.
So, by the way, I do want to say publicly, I said it to you privately, but I love your news editions, that you do. I love bringing that information and adding some beauty context, to it.
Thank you.
And kind of related to that, because I always say to folks, that we are, kind of the mirror image of our larger world. If the larger world's doing good, we're doing good. The larger world, sometimes there's a little lag time, but we are very connected to something much bigger than ourselves, including the economy and a whole lot more. And it's important that we know that. We're coming into an election year. We're in an election year. Okay, I mean, it'll be here before we know it. And then whatever happens, out of that and from that. If I had the magic 8 ball, to do my magic 8 ball, it would come up and it would be, I don't know what the F is coming. And, the implications of an election year, you've mentioned that. and what it can or might not mean economically. There's history we can look at, but most of the experts I pay attention to are like, we're in an unusual time, an unusual year. Even are we in a recession? Not in a recession. Even that is confusing for a lot of people. It's just a very confusing, messy time, and it's all external to our industry. And got my fingers crossed.
Nice. Cool. And then any advice that you want to sign off for the business owner or aspiring business owner?
Find great mentors and role models. I don't know it. I don't recall meeting anybody who's had great success in this industry who didn't almost immediately call out their mentor. The person, and by mentor, the person you can talk to. You can call up and say, "Hey, here's what I'm thinking about. Can you give me 2 cents?" I've got a bunch of them, and they're really, really important to me. And I think wherever you are in your career, if you can't point to that person, then start looking for one. And I think as important, a little bit less important, but right, almost as important are just role models, people in the industry who you don't get to talk to, but who you can look to and pay attention to and go, no, I want to be like that person as well. And those two things together, I think, are game changing for anybody, whether it's behind the chair in the work that you want to do or as a business owner. Game changing.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you again, Gordon. And anybody out there that really enjoyed this interview, I encourage you to check out. I encourage you to check out Gordon's podcast, Social Beauty Makers, at socialbeautymakers.com. And he's also got a newsletter. And so definitely check him out. Thank you again, Gordon, for your time.